Hello everyone, this is likely to be one of the first videos that you're all seeing where I'm recording this in the middle of the day, so I'm actually wide awake now, and it's not in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping. Now, I've been playing a bunch of different gacha games. I primarily have been sticking to Arknights and Genshin Impact. Those are my two, with Genshin being the one that I first got started with, as I mentioned numerous times before on this channel, and Arknights being the one that I'm just slowly learning my way through. If you've been watching the recent videos, you know that I've gone from loving the game to raging at the game to being very confused. And I have a lot to say about each of those games, but ultimately today's discussion is primarily going to focus just on meta. Now, ages ago I made a previous video discussing and going over my thoughts regarding meta in video games, specifically gacha games, but I want to revisit that topic with a bit more clarity now than I did back then. First and foremost, I want everybody who's watching this just to know that I am a waifu over meta player, particularly because I feel like there's no point to playing a game if I'm not enjoying it. And even though I understand if you are an individual who plays for meta reasons that you can have fun, I personally don't. And I want to clarify in a different sense that either way, whether you personally play for waifu or whether you personally play for meta and summon for meta characters, it doesn't matter. So long as you yourself are enjoying the game and playing for whatever reason you want to, then by all means do that. It doesn't necessarily matter either way. If you're a meta player and you summon and only pull for meta-based units, then I feel like that's perfectly fine, so long as you aren't pushing that ideal onto other individuals. And the same reasons go for waifu enjoyers. I just feel like it becomes a big issue when individuals choose to fight over it or choose to in some way speak down to another individual for summoning and playing for a specific reason, regardless of what that reason may be. Effort is put into both sides, the character's actual value in gameplay and the character's design, and if you appreciate one of those more than the other, cool. I think meta can heavily impact a game though. I don't want to be an individual who solely focuses on Genshin, but that's the one I have the most experience with, and I want to talk about that. Because if you're looking at the history of Genshin Impact from the very beginning of the game's release to its current state, you've had a bunch of top tier meta units come out that have shaped the entire landscape of the game. That being characters like Venti, who as a result of his strength and power for crowd control, introduced much heavier enemies later on in Inazuma, those being the Kairagi, who could no longer be lifted up by him, which subsequently reduced his viability. As a result, however, we also have tankier enemies and heavier enemies that reduced crowd control's viability overall. It's why Kazuha was pushed up above Venti, because Venti was so powerful that enemies needed to be, in a sense, reduced. After that, we've had characters like Ganyu, who was the meta top tier cryo DPS with the AoE and immense mental damage she could do, both in freeze and mode compositions, and as a result of her, we had Morgana being introduced. As a result, to end up quelling that, we've had enemies that can no longer be frozen. She's still extremely powerful in mode. I personally play her in melt. And I think that there are certain ways in which meta can be introduced and extremely powerful units can be introduced into the game without breaking it entirely. And that also heavily depends on the player base. Let's be honest, if everybody pulls for the strongest unit in the game, well, now the game has to be balanced around that, in the same way that most games are balanced around what is the strongest character or the strongest weapon. Simply because, as opposed to making the game too easy, you have to balance it out. And the problem with that is, it can lead to the game being imbalanced or feeling unfair to players who don't particularly use those sets of strategies, those characters, or whatever the strongest gear is. Now, I'm not advocating for people pulling for the strongest unit only or essentially being required, but I'm also not an individual who wants everything to be balanced around one unit, because it ends up leading to other parts of combat or other parts of the game's core aspects feeling a bit dull. I asked all of you in the community tab of my YouTube channel, go over there if you haven't already, because I do kind of post there pretty often, and I do occasionally use the answers provided there for videos, but I asked all of you, what's your opinion on meta and gacha games? Avoid the philosophical comments that you people try to throw out here. The main sentiment is that it should be an option instead of a necessity. Individuals don't want to feel forced to abide by the meta or always go based on the most powerful or the strongest or the best compositions. They want to have the freedom of choice whilst also being able to acknowledge that, hey, this unit is strong, and hey, if you get them, it would make the content easier. Everybody likes being effective, everybody likes having an easier and lighter time, and if they know the route and can adequately plan ahead and do enjoy it, then by all means do that. But nobody wants to feel like they're required to or have an awful experience. It'd be like if you were playing a Souls game, whether that be Dark Souls, Elden Ring, or Bloodborne, or even Sekiro, and the game's content and difficulty was geared specifically around one weapon type. For the sake of clarity, let's just say you're utilizing katanas. The Uchi-katana in the Soulsborne and Elden Ring series, and let's say it's balanced around the Ludwig's Holy Blade in the Bloodborne series. Sekiro we're not counting because, you only get one weapon type essentially. And the issue isn't necessarily that these weapons exist in these games. The games themselves have a variety of weapons, and to a degree, some are more balanced than others. But the problem is, if the game was geared specifically for these one weapon types, with you being penalized so heavily for building stats or for building around other weapon archetypes, people wouldn't feel as inclined to play. One of, at least in my opinion, the benefits of the Soul series is that even though there's a challenge and it's very difficult content, the game itself can be played in whatever way you enjoy. If you enjoy faith or sorcery builds, you can do that all the way. If you enjoy utilizing guns in the Bloodborne series, you can. The trick weapons you don't necessarily have to use, you don't have to use the secondary form, but you can. These are options that you have. You're not required or forced or funneled down into one particular path. In gacha games, the goal is obviously to clear the content in the game, but technically meta can be used to save either your resources, your time, or money depending on if you spend. But depending on who you are, meta can't necessarily or isn't necessarily the be all end all. Most individuals, at least by my expectation, are individuals who intend on playing a game long term, whether you're investing into Arknights or gacha game like Genshin, or maybe you're playing Blue Archive. If you pick up the strongest unit in the game, it's more than likely going to be something that helps you early game, but towards the late game, you can clear it with the other units and teams that you have. Meta can push your account really further early game, and if that is something that you want to do, if it in turn allows you to get more rewards, whether that be from a current event or something else in the future, then by all means, I can see the advantages of it. But let's say hypothetically you're only pulling for the strongest units, well, late game, the difficult content that you're able to clear with your team is also able to be cleared by other teams because and simply due to the amount of time and resources invested into those teams. Don't get me wrong, there will always be incredibly hard content in most games that you can clear with the strongest units, and you will have an easier time if you choose to. But if you don't, and you do invest time and resources properly into the characters that you have, and let's say we're doing this on the Arknight standpoint, let's say instead of summoning for strong units, you just use who you think is cute. You are able to clear the game's content with just those teams. Now, you may have a harder time than somebody using Ling, Surtur, and I don't know who else, but you still can. And I think there's a very important differentiation to make. The ability to clear the game's hardest content and solely invest into characters that you want is something that I consider to be good game design, because instead of forcing and funneling players down into the option of not only picking strong units, but being required to build certain archetypes, I think that concept is far worse than just saying, yeah, look, the game may not be the hardest for everybody, but it's still difficult enough that it requires some investment and some time. All in all, look, I'm a waifu over meta player. I quite like pulling for the units that I think are cute. It's why I have Golden Glow. It's why I built up Ansel and Arknights. I mean, look at him. Overall, I enjoy these games. And if I'm talking about Genshin Impact, hey, look, I got Yorimiya, I got Xiao, I got MC1 actually, I got Albedo. I didn't pull for the strongest units, I pulled for units that I thought were cool. I have Sino, he's unbuilt, but we don't talk about that. Ultimately, the concept of being able to invest into units that you think are fun is incredibly important, and I think I would rather a balanced game overall rather than a game that's geared towards the hardest content, featuring and focusing around the hardest and strongest characters. Because even if the content necessarily isn't difficult, it's still fun, and I would rather have fun than suffer. I know I kind of rambled, but look, I just finished an exam and my brain is a little bit fried, but either way, I do intend to upload more frequently, with a little bit more consistency. Tomorrow's video will probably be a Blue Archive video and an Arknights video, so if you're interested in either one of those games, consider subscribing and leaving a like if you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.